Hi, I'm Nick Hasty. I'm a VP of Product Machine Learning at Giphy, and I take my coffee with cream and monk fruit, and I usually like very strong blends. The darker, the better.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another MLOps community podcast. You know what it is right now. We are out here talking with Nick Hasty. He was the first engineer at Giphy, a little company that did things with GIFs, and it absolutely blew up. We talked all about his journey into AI product from the web dev space. Actually, before that, even, we got into a little music, side chat, tangent, because as you know, I love playing music and I love making music. And so if I have a musician on here, we're probably going to do a little bit of a tangent. So we had that happen. We had him talk about his journey from music to web dev, then joining this little startup in 2013, when it was just like one other person, maybe the founder and him, and how he has been able to grow with the company. And the company has exploded, as we said, but we all know Giphy, it was like, I don't know if it's only me because I am a millennial. I use that all the time. I would just reply in comments with GIFs. Now I've had to start toning back my GIF usage because apparently it makes me look old. But I love me a GIF. I do. I love me a GIF. And so anyway, Nick also talked to me about the way that Giphy is using AI and how that has changed from 2013 until now, how they were leveraging AI for their semantic search capabilities back in the day. And that is a cool little story. And then what they're doing in their R&D department for AI these days. He also filled us in on all kinds of cool stories over the years that he's had scaling up with good old Giphy. I mean, I feel like this is one of those that is very near and dear to my heart because I've used it so much and love using it. Last little bit about Nick before we jump into it. He has been helping startups, and it is cool to see how he talked about what he advises the startups that he helps these days. He's mentioned that some of his former coworkers have gone on to start things, or people that have worked under him. And it's really nice to see what he said now versus maybe even just 3 years ago. All right. I think that is it. Let's get into this conversation with Nick. And if you liked it, leave me a GIF as a reply. That's the only way to do it. I think you got to reach out to me and just send me a GIF, and I will know that you listened to this and you enjoyed it. And give me your funniest GIFs. I want to see the best GIFs that you've got. I don't even care. No censors involved. Give me some weird ones. Okay? Enjoy this. We'll talk to you on the other side. So I locked myself out of the house today, and my wife, the reason I went out of my house was because I was looking for my phone and I thought it was in my car. And so I went out of the house and went to look for the phone that was in the car, but turns out my wife took the phone and the keys that I grabbed, and I left the doors open and everything, but it's a little bit stormy right here.
Yeah.
And boom, the wind blew it closed. So basically I think, oh man, my phone, it's in my car, and I walk outside, leave the doors open, grab some keys, don't really think much about it, and the storm blew the doors shut, and I realize when I get down to where the car's parked, there's no car, and so the phone was, yes, it was in the car, but my wife had taken the car, and so then I was like, all right, well, I can't do that two-factor login that I wanted to do with my phone because they were texting me. I'll wait to do that one. Then I get back to the house and I realized that the doors had been shut from the storm. And then I'm like, no problem, whatever. I got the keys, and I grabbed the keys our neighbors are going out of town and they left us their keys, and those are the ones that I grabbed when
comedy
I
of
went out
nerves.
So then I was sitting there and I went to our neighbors and I was like, can you text my wife, tell her to come home because I'm locked out, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't come home. She's not coming home. And I'm realizing, hey, we've got this conversation we're supposed to be having.
Yeah.
And I look up on our balcony. I'm like, I wonder if one of those doors is open. So now I got to figure out how to scale up the side of this building.
Wow.
And get onto the balcony. Managed to do that, climb onto the balcony. The doors aren't open though, except here in Germany, there's this like setting for the doors where you can put it so the top folds out. I don't know if you've seen that. So it's not like it opens this way, it opens from the top.
Yeah.
And so
you crawled into that.
Yeah, it goes and it opens from the top, and then there's another door right next to it, but the door handle is on the other side. So I'm trying to reach for the door handle, try and open that. Doesn't work. And we've got this wardrobe outside on our balcony, and I'm looking for tools that I can use to like latch on to that. I end up finding a way to push open the door handle, and boom, it swings open.
Impressive.
And I was able. Yeah. So might as well just call me MacGyver for the rest of this conversation.
It's kind of nice to have those tests every now and then, right? Where you're like, worst case scenario, I mean, I can figure it out. I got it.
Yeah. Yep. And then I'm going to have to wait. And I wouldn't have had any way to let you know that I'm totally blowing you off, you know? So I would have felt horrible because I wouldn't have had my phone and I wouldn't have been able to get to my computer, which was inside. And so I was like, I really got to get to this conversation. That was like the only thing that I had slated for today. So anyway, man.
You made it. Nice work.
I made it. And I'm glad I did. So now for those who are tuning in, you've been working at Giphy for a long while. Giphy, for those who do not know, is the millennials' favorite thing to do on Slack and or any social media. I heard that it's not as cool anymore for the Gen Z, but I still love it and I abuse it along with all of my other friends. And I'd love to just dig in the next 30, 40 minutes to your experience being the first engineer at Giphy, and then going from an individual contributor, being an engineer on the team, having to wear many hats, because in a startup, we all know that everything's on fire every day. And then as the organization matured, your role probably solidified more and you started leading teams. And you've been doing all of this with the initiative of using machine learning. And so I think it's super valuable to hear about how you've been using machine learning, how that's changed over the years, your own personal journey and how that's changed over the years. And then really what Giphy's up to these days and how machine learning is working. So let's just start with the idea of where'd you come from? Like you joined Giphy 10 years ago. What were you doing before that?
Yeah, totally. Well, one thing beforehand, GIFs are definitely a millennial thing, but our most popular content now is stickers, which is like what people layer on top of videos, and we power stickers in a bunch of different applications that people use. So that's kind of like, so there's how we get into the youngins.
Gen Z. There we go.
Yeah, the Gen Z. But yeah, so I got kind of a broad background. I grew up in North Georgia, kind of a rural area. And there wasn't much computer stuff happening here. Surprise, surprise. There was a lot of football and a lot of church. But I was, kind of not in that zone so much. And I got into music. I was playing in like bands through high school, like punk, and even in like a ska band and stuff like that, because that was what was popular at the time. And then I went to college in Georgia, and I was an English major, and I was in Athens, Georgia. And I only went there because I wanted to play music. That was the only thing, that was like my overriding belief was that music is the best thing that anyone can do with their lives. And so I followed that for a long time. But then as I got a little older, I was like, okay, I got to make money. And like, maybe I want to have a family one day. And so I went to a grad program in New York at NYU. It's called Interactive Telecommunications Program, ITP. And what they do is take people from broad backgrounds and kind of throw technology at them. And I had some music tech stuff, already kind of in my wheelhouse. But it was at ITP where I really started doing things that really challenged me that I wasn't familiar with. Everything from like circuit design and prototyping to programming. And I had to bash my head against a lot of this stuff for a couple of years. But it kind of broke through, and all the assumptions I had about myself of me not being that kind of person. I'm like this lit guy in critical theory or whatever. Like that was I can't do programming. I was like, oh wait, actually I like this. I'm pretty good at it. But I kind of stuck with like my principles a little bit, and I was still really into art. And so after ITP, I started working for this organization called Rhizome, which is based in the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York. I'd been interning there. I was a fan of the place because it was a nonprofit arts organization that was devoted to internet art. And so it had been around since the 90s, and they had been promoting and even archiving, people doing weird things on the internet, like weird websites, weird email stuff, just people kind of like taking apart and tinkering with what constitutes the internet, weird websites with JavaScript that like open infinite windows, or like, you look in the source code and there's like bomb schematics and stuff, like, so cool stuff like that, right?
Basically, it was NFTs before NFTs.
Yeah, totally. I mean, those ideas were discussed in that community before they became a popular thing, and that was a lot of fun. And in the process, I had to do a whole lot of web programming because I was the only engineer at this little nonprofit, and we had a lot of responsibility. And also got really familiar with GIFs because, GIFs are these things that are native to the internet, right? There's this media format that's like been there since day one, and people have been doing art through GIFs. Like GIFs was their medium that they made art through, and I had to archive a lot of that stuff, and I had to learn how they worked. And so that was 4 years or something. And then after that, I was doing a lot of freelance stuff, just kind of helping startups in New York City, just doing early stage stuff. And I had a friend who was with this kind of an incubator / venture capital organization called BetaWorks, and they're still around, pretty big in New York. And they were like, hey, why don't you come over here? We got this new program called Hackers in Residence, where we're pulling in, kind of serial entrepreneurs and letting them build something. They need some help. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, what's working? Who's there? And they were like, what is this guy building a GIF search engine? And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fun. That sounds cool. I was like, and so I came and met. And this guy's Alex Chung. He's the founder of Giphy. And, I met him that day, and he kind of did a quick interview about how I would do stuff and some technical stuff. And, he was like, I did good, I guess. And he was like, okay, can you start tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, let's do it, And so, yeah, so that was, this is like February of 2013, I think. He built the first Giphy prototype in November of 2012, and it was just like a website doing, full text search against the MySQL database, with a bunch of crawled Tumblr data. And, but it was like super popular, and people were crashing it, because they were using it. There was like this demand, right? There was very clearly a demand. And so we started building this thing, and, he was coding and I was coding, and I was doing the website, a lot of that stuff, and he was doing a lot of the API. And yeah, it was just one of those things where it was like, if you keep building it, they keep coming. And, I think what we, what we were kind of like working on was the idea that there's something happening in GIFs that is very unique and distinct and kind of new. And that is that people are using them to communicate. And we saw this in action on, a lot of different, message boards and websites like that were real popular back in the day, like Tumblr, for instance. People would post something, and then people would put comments in the GIFs, put GIFs in the comments, as like a reaction or a response. Or sometimes people would post something that was a GIF, and then they would have some caption underneath that was like, something, they were making an analogy between what's happening in the image and then what's in the text, right? And it was like usually real funny, like real silly stuff. And we were like, this is cool. This is a really interesting emergent behavior that's happening here. And like, we should just get this everywhere, right? Like, this needs to be in every place that people are on the internet, or any place that people communicate. We want to give them the ability to communicate in this format. So that's what we did. And, we built plugins for every WordPress, like everything that people posted, we built a plugin for it. Slack wasn't even around yet, but there was like WeChat and things like that. And we would build integrations there. And we just built this network, and we were pulling in content from all over the internet. And the goal was to just create this big network, right? We didn't want to create a social network, which was, at this point in time, it was still like an idea. We're like, hey, we're going to create a social network, right? And people were like, oh, cool. But we were like, we're not going to do that. We're going to create a network that is a content distribution network for communication that plugs into these different networks. And it was funny too, because we'd go hire and we'd look for people, and most people would kind of laugh at us. They were just like, a GIF search engine, that's stupid, memes, whatever. That's like, they would laugh. And I was like, okay, that's fine. That you probably don't want to work here then.
Meanwhile,
yeah.
You're getting like gigantic scale. And
yeah, oh yeah, totally. It was like, it was wild. Sometimes I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me right now, because it was like one of those like hockey stick parabolic growth things, right? Where it was just like, it's like, here's here's how many GIFs we're serving, and it's just like boop, 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 straight up, and we're just constantly deploying our infrastructure. I was kind of, a full stack person. I was like really struggling to keep up and to learn and to like, how do I provision all this stuff and, write scripts. Virtual machines were still kind of new. AWS was still kind of new. And I was like,
Kubernetes was not a thing at all.
Yeah. Like auto scaling, wasn't totally there yet. And it was like, it was a wild ride. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I like those kind of situations. And, like what you said earlier, if it's, startups are, they're kind of a free for all, right? Like, you got to have alignment in terms of, it's like, to me, they're like cults, it's like a cult, right? You have a cult leader, kind of the founder, and then everyone has to really, really believe in that founder and believe in the idea. And that gives you an irrational principle or an irrational set of beliefs that you adhere to that guide your actions and guide your behavior, right? Because all things being said, there's no reason why any of that should work, like left alone, these things would not emerge and by itself, right? So it's like, okay, we got to make it happen. And so yeah, you got to do random stuff. Like, yeah, you may be programming, but then you may have to like, run a Reddit community on the side, or like, do BD development or like whatever, because if you don't, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's so many parallels there. I first want to just point out, I feel like I got into tech the same way as you. I'm a music lover at heart and wanted to just play music for the rest of my life.
Right.
And then my daughter was born, and I'm like, I got to go make money. I can't be doing this music thing like 24/7 anymore. Yeah. So had to take a long, hard, cold look in the mirror and get into tech. And so there's that piece. But then I really like how you were able to adapt, because I feel like a lot of people aren't able to hit those scaling issues or hit those issues where it's like, oh, now I need to go figure out like how to do this. I've only done web development, but looks like I need to be more full stack. Let me go figure that out. Where do you think you went right where others may fall off?
You mean me individually or like the company?
You individually.
I think I kind of tend to operate with a recognition of all the uncertainty that I have. And that uncertainty is like really strong. And so I'm just like, I don't understand this. I don't know enough. And it takes a lot for me to be satisfied to actually know something. And so, during this time period, it's just this kind of constant, unrelenting search for people, for information online, for whatever it takes to figure out how to solve this problem, and never assuming that, it's not just going to come innately, right? Like I'm not just going to magically get struck by lightning and figure this out, right? Like I got to get out there and hustle and do what it takes to solve that, patch that problem, spend the time and effort to research, and then try to apply. And then, a lot of times it doesn't work because you have imperfect information and you're doing this. You're like, okay, shit, that didn't work. Oh, you quick think,
Gotta iterate.
How do you move? What else? What do I not get here? And, having the pressure of angry people on Twitter saying, "Lol, Giphy's down" or something, like that's just like, it's like you're sweating.
The mob
so
comes
like,
after you. Yeah, that's
yeah,
so
totally,
cool.
yeah,
The anxiety that must induce the
yeah,
hundreds of thousands of people you're letting down. Like they can't react in the way that is most natural to them.
yeah, totally. Yeah, we took it with a grain of salt. I mean, we were always like acknowledging the absurdity of the situation. Like we're getting paid to like give people gifts, and if the gifts don't flow for a little while, like all the orphans and the sick people in the world, they're still there. We're not, we're not killing anyone, or we're not hurt. So we're lucky to have the stakes were high, but they were different than a lot of other people who were doing things. So
Yeah, that's so good. And now one thing that I'm interested in too is the trajectory of AI, and maybe we can start by diving into like, how did you shift from being an engineer to going more into product and AI?
Yeah, totally. So I think I would consider myself more of a product engineer in a way, which is great when you're a startup early on and you need someone who's like can kind of imagine the product and then build the product. And it may not be the best and it may not be the most efficient, but like as long as it works and it doesn't, kill the user experience enough, then ship it. But I think as Giphy started scaling, we had like real engineering problems that we had to solve. Like as soon as we hit these integrations with major social networks, and Facebook was hit us up and they'd be like, you got to shave 30 milliseconds off your response time. Like it'd be like, that's like
30,
okay, yeah, it's like okay, let's figure it out. Yeah, so then those problems started happening, and I addressed those the best I could, but then you start hiring to serve those things. But I wouldn't say that's like my zone, right? Like I can try to figure it out, but I'm not going to be like, this isn't my happy place per se. And so luckily I started just moving into like what we called special products and R&D at first. Once we got the other engineers in there to help with some of those scaling things and focusing on those things. And I was like, I don't really want to do this, I want to do something else. And so I had a pretty good sense of the problems of the business in general. So I started trying to figure out, okay, what are things we could build internally that'll help make things easier for the company to flow and the company to be more efficient? Or what are experiments we can do to, show new ways you can interact with the product? And
a lot of stickers.
Yeah. So one of those things was like, search at this time period was, super powered by tags. Everything was tags. And we would pull in content from the internet, and then we had like, a team of like 5 or 6 editors that were like curating and tagging stuff, right? But the more content we pulled in, because I'd written a lot of web crawlers and stuff, and I was just kind of vacuuming in as much as we could. Clearly, there's that problem that doesn't scale. And so I was like, okay, well, there's this new thing, computer vision, ML, there are people who are, finding labels for stuff. And I was like, this is the future, this is what we got to do, So I started looking into that, researching that. I didn't really have the technical background there. So I started, looking for third-party solutions or like other ways of just spinning stuff up, knowing that there was no way the company continues growth without having this stuff. So how do we get it in and start moving it and leveraging it, and back then it wasn't so great. I mean, it was very general, like object detection stuff, but so it wasn't, in the metadata we needed tended to be hyper specific and very culturally relevant and abstract and that kind of stuff. But we stuck with it. And then as like other models started coming out that did more things, we were able to leverage those. Like, for instance, WordDevec, that came out, and that was primarily for NLP, but we were able to leverage it for content recommendations, and it's still like used. It still outperforms like graph networks and other things we've tried out. We had the idea or read the idea and adapted it to like take user information, like user session data, anonymized, of course, but like, hey, they looked at this GIF, they did this search, and then they clicked on that, treat that like a sentence in a corpus of text, and then feed that into WordDevec, and it learns semantic relationships between, like, we would use GIF IDs, not GIFs, but the idea of the GIF. It learned the semantic relationship between like the GIF and the query and the click and these kinds of things, and you build like a really great embedding of like pop culture and communication and expression and emotions along with images. And we could even do like the kind of arithmetic stuff where you could take like, like king minus man plus woman equals queen. And for us, it was like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings minus somebody plus a woman. And then it gets like Beyonce, like Queen Bee, like it was like very like it totally worked. Like that was like, you could literally, traverse the vectors like that.
Wow.
It was super fun.
And this was pre-vector database explosion now, right?
Exactly right. This is like 2018 or so. And so we were still, we were using like KNN lookups for these kinds of things and compressing them in that. So so that was a lot of fun. And I think when I started seeing those things, I was like, wow, this is super interesting, creative that these models can learn these things. Like, maybe in the world we live in now, all these problems seem so solved, but NLP was still struggling with like, these kind of things back in the day, especially like language is messy and slippery and, different things have different meanings and it all depends on the context, right? Language ultimately is just a construct of how people communicate and how our brains learn the context of what we communicate, right? And that's kind of the foundation behind a lot of these models. And I was like Word2Vec, it was all about, context. What's the context in which the thing appears? And that's still very relevant, obviously, to like things like attention and these kinds of things. So the context is learned from the data, right? And if your data is emotions and memes and moods and feelings and images, then yeah, it's going to learn stuff. And it's going to learn the difference between, like if you have a search term like good morning, right? Like good morning sounds like simple, but there's like 10 different ways to say good morning. There's like ironic good morning. There's like, sarcastic good morning. Good morning.
Sunrise.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, totally.
Coffee. Yeah.
Exactly.
So many different ways.
So many different ways, right? So when someone searches good morning, like you don't know what exactly version of good morning they have, right? What's their intent? But these networks kind of helped us learn these things. And then we could present a wide variety of interpretations of this really simple concept. Yeah.
And then when they click in, you see this is also, here's a few that are similar to this.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's all reinforcing, the more they click, the more these models. But yeah, I think I was like, wow, these kind of, Word2Vec's very simple, relatively speaking, compared to a lot of things, but it learned these super complex relationships like irony and sarcasm, these things that linguists used to say, there's no way you can encode that into programming and stuff, right? Because there's just too much complexity or too much slippage. But if everything's just statistical, then boom, you can solve it, And so I think that got me really inspired and really excited to see that happen.
What do you think is one of the reasons that you would call yourself or you would identify as a product engineer more than anything?
Yeah. I mean, I like to make things for people to use, like if I have an idea for something, I want to see it emerge. And my ideas for things are usually things that people interact with, like in music too, you play music, you play it partially for your own like joy, but it's also, you're sharing an experience, right? With other people, you're communicating something inside of you with other people. And I think that, you can think of product like that too. It's like, there's this thing that could exist in the world that can make people feel good or feel joy or feel happy or maybe better their lives in some way. So you want to see it happen, there's an itch, right? There's a pain in the world or there's a problem and you have an itch and you think you can solve it,
Yeah. Do you feel like that has changed a ton now since the advent of LLMs and this whole boom? Because I feel like, just from my perspective, not to bias your answer or anything, but what I've seen is that the product engineers who understand a bit about how APIs work, they can hack together something pretty quick, are able to stand up MVPs that they don't have to now wait for the ML team or the platform team or the data team to actually get going. They can just say, hey, look, here, if we did this, I think it would be useful. Here's a quick demo of it. Is everyone else on board? So Like, how, in your experience, has it changed because of that, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, shipping ML products has historically been difficult and kind of tedious, right? It's like, okay, you got to gather the data. Do we have the right data? You spend a ton of time like making sure that the model is going to build a representation that is aligned with what you want.
Hey everyone, my name is Aparna, founder of Arise, and the best way to stay up to date with MLOps is by subscribing to this podcast.
And that's a whole thing into itself. And then you got to find the right network, and then you train and you evaluate, and then it's like, okay, what's the interface? Like, how does this thing live? And then before that, like, how do you deploy? How do you prop this thing up? Because it's like, we got this huge binary file that's slow as hell. Like, how do we? So yeah, it's a whole world, right?
You don't even know at the end of the day, after doing all of this, if the end user is going to find it valuable.
Exactly.
You got to go through all that crap just to figure out that, oh yeah, this feature isn't even that useful.
Totally. I mean, exactly. So yeah, I mean, these things, LLMs, they're so powerful and they're so easy to do things that were historically very complicated. Even like, like you can use a sophisticated LLM to do really interesting and novel analysis on data and like text in real time, right? And like, it's not just about producing text. It's like, hey, here's something the user said, evaluate this and classify it, right? So if you have the right prompt, you can build a cool classifier, right? That takes in some really difficult text, or not even difficult, like, it's one thing where if you're building stuff for people and they have to press a button and that button is true or false, right? If you're working with speech or language, then there's a whole lot of different ways to say true or false, like yes, maybe, or sure thing, or whatever, and then you can build a true false classifier based on language, using an LLM. And that's, historically you might have some kind of crazy substring list or whatever, right? You're checking against, right? But it's never complete, right? It's never enough. But these things, you can put all these things together and you can build really amazing, yeah, exactly what you're saying, MVPs of stuff, right? Because I think what's interesting is that the interfaces are moving away from being purely Boolean in a way, buttons and stuff, to being more just statistical in nature, which is more like reality itself. So we can build interfaces that are more natural to people, I think,
And I also wonder, when you're thinking about building products now, how do you evaluate, should we use an LLM for this use case, or should we use this older or traditional or smaller model or boring, less sexy thing? Because we've got years of use out of it. It's battle tested. If it ain't broke, don't fix it type thing.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's all about what are you building, right? And what is the value you're delivering in the product? And if, and in that sense, the tools are chosen out of necessity and not because you want to use some tech, right? If you got something battle tested that works and fulfills the need, use that. You don't need an LLM. But if you have something that there's no existing tool for, or using an LLM will save you, you could do it the old-fashioned way, but you would have the pain that we kind of just described in that process. Then use it. I mean, the only thing with LLMs is that they're kind of slow. So there's the latency issue, and there's the scalability issue. I mean, I think all those things will go away over time. That's kind of the nature of tech. But I think if you're building something that's purely LLM based right now, then you're going to have to contend with those things.
Yeah, you're getting that call from Facebook, and they're saying shave 30 milliseconds off, and you're like, I can't do that. The OpenAI response time is anywhere from 3 minutes to 30.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. So but I mean, if the thing you're building, if you can build in to the end product, if you can build in the expectation for a delay, right? And the experience, then maybe it doesn't matter so much. So again, it's all about what are you building and what are you trying to deliver, I think.
Yeah.
And but now there's so much cool stuff. You can deliver things that could never have been done, or have, much more complexity or interesting end states than you ever could. It's a great time, in my opinion, to be an engineer.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's amazing,
It's incredible. And especially someone who thinks about product and is
Yeah.
product focused, product minded. And I also wanted to ask you, thinking about building products and especially in this AI space that you play in, what's your opinion on like the intuition of, hey, I know this product is going to work well versus we need data on if this product is going to work well, or we need to see more examples of this working well before we actually move forward with it. And especially because, you're building at a gigantic scale, right? So it's something that I imagine you can, if you want, you can A/B test like crazy, or you can do a lot of experiments. And so you've almost got like all that at your fingertips. How do you look at leveraging that when building these AI features?
Totally. I think you kind of have to have both. I think if you come up with something new, it can come from data, like you're like there's some, like if you're analyzing a bunch of user data, like if you have a pre-existing product and there's a bunch of user data about how people use that product, then you can examine that data and then say, okay, there's a pain point here, or there's some kind of like narrative in here that's unique and different. And you can isolate and pull that out and then build around that narrative. That's like one data-driven way from starting from scratch. Or it's like, intuition is just, in my opinion, like it's inference based on your brain's collected wisdom and knowledge, right? So it's like, so if you know a space really well or like a domain really well, you can say, okay, I have some intuition about what could be a good product in this space. And then you start building, and then you have to test, right? And then, what you build and what your intuition is, though, oftentimes is very different, with what the end result is versus what you think it needs to be out there, oftentimes is very different. And sometimes you'll be right, and you'll be like, I was exactly right. That's a home run. Like this, what I had in my head is exactly what people wanted. But like, that's very rarely the case. And when you are thinking at these scales, you're thinking about distributions of users, and you got to find what's the product that makes, the top of the bell curve happiest to get the most people happy per se. Or unless you want to, but sometimes you do have to engineer for the outliers and these kinds of things. So I think it's a mixture of both, and this is kind of well-worn territory with product development and startups, it's like user testing, continuous, testing and product development, that kind of thing. I think that's all true. I think you can dilute yourself though, right? And like, I think you have to have your North Star. Like, what am I actually trying to build, and what's the experience I'm going for here? And if you end up doing too much testing, I think you could end up with some kind of, product that's delivered by, too much collective information. And it's kind of like, doesn't make anyone upset, but doesn't really make anyone happy, right?
Yeah.
And that could be a bad thing. So I think you got to have both, but you got to stick to your guns, really. You got to stick to your vision, and your vision may change. So it's like what you build may not be the thing, but as long as whatever you end up with is, delivering the same kind of value or the same kind of joy to the user that you wanted to, then you win,
I like what you said right there, this product development that ends up not pissing anybody off, but not making anybody a super fan.
Yeah.
And how it's like you playing it safe isn't getting you any accolades in a way.
Yeah.
But you're also not going to get fired. So
exactly.
Hopefully,
right.
It's a funny one because it's like you almost have to fight against that inertia to just do what you think is going to work, and or what will work, as opposed to taking a bigger swing and going for something else. And especially with, that's the idea with that you were talking about with the LLMs and being able to do so many new things, and being able to incorporate AI into your product in all these different ways. this is a great segue though into talking about what you all are doing now at Giphy, as opposed to, you told us about back in the day. This word to vec is incredible.
Yeah.
I love that. But how has it evolved? If it has, maybe you.
Yeah, for sure. So the ML team that I've been running for a couple of years, it's always pretty small and scrappy, but we've been able to do a lot of different things. Back in 2018, we had a network that we released in open source. It was like a celebrity detector. It's like just a convolutional neural network that we trained on a bunch of celebrity information, and you could upload a photo, and it would detect what celebrity you looked the most like or what celebrity it was, and that was like a fun Giphy-esque kind of product thing. But in terms of inside the company, like it's used all over the place. We use machine learning, these kinds of things. Obviously, we do search, right? Like so, anyone doing search now is and not using ML in the search is going to miss out. So we used that same model I'd mentioned earlier. We use embeddings from that in the search. We do just various kind of vector embeddings and those kinds of things to help us find better matches. Beyond. Like the whole goal is like you got this sequence of images moving, what are all the ways you can extract metadata from that? So you got to be scrappy and come up with creative ideas. And then we also have things for like, tagging, like when people upload content, we have a model that we've created that takes in the image or the GIF and then recommends tags based on Giphy's tagging structure and popular queries that allow people to tag that content. So it'll help show up in our search. But yeah, ever since, so like Giphy in and of itself is like, at least the way most people use it, which is in Slack or some sort of integration, some sort of third-party integration, like you put in some text and you get an image, right? Like, so like, obviously when DALL-E came out, the first one, we were like, I was like, oh, that's it. That's the future, but, we didn't have all that resources. So, but we've been kind of steadily playing with that the best we could. And we've been focusing on generative stuff a lot. We don't have any products that are like release candidates right now, but we do have it internal. We built a fun internal generative GIF maker that works just like the Slack bot.
Nice.
We can type in some text and then we'll generate GIFs, and largely because, I think this is true. Any generative video product you use right now, like everyone knows the quality can vary, right?
Yeah.
And so like, there are some amazing ones with amazing engineering behind them, but I wouldn't consider generative video solved, right? And totally.
So hit or miss too. And just
so
depending
miss,
on basically how the model feels. I don't know how to
totally, yeah.
What to say on.
I wouldn't say there's something that we're like, yeah, this is it, launch it. Maybe if we had different resources, but it's, but we've been, luckily the open source community is great. There's like all these different models that come out that we can experiment with, especially like Animate Diff, the latest one, we've been using that for a lot of stuff in-house just to experiment with the anticipation that, people will solve this problem in the community or whatever. And we can, we've always been kind of an applied machine learning, so it's like, what are we building, right? We're building something that could generate a sticker or generate a GIF. Well, what's our user expectation? Well, they're, maybe they can deal with some noise or some weirdness, or maybe they can't. We do have past experience that tells us that people do like weird stuff, especially in Slack. The early days.
I'm just thinking like if you know all of the GIFs that I've posted, you probably, I'm probably like, again, middle of the road, but I've posted some weird shit with GIFs.
Yeah, no,
I can only imagine the other weird shit you've seen.
Oh yeah, we had special collections that we still have. Just our highlights. But yeah, like with Slack, right? Early on, it was kind of very random, right? Like our collection was limited, and people would use the integration, and we'd return something, and it was still very random, and it was kind of random. And people either loved it or they hated it, right? Like they were like, you guys can't do search. This is highly irrelevant. What's going on? Or people would be like, oh, this is so weird. I get the juxtaposition between what I typed in and what this image is, and then like the whole office laughs, right? Because some funny thing comes back, right? And then the whole office is everyone's dealing with this juxtaposition between this text and this image. and the conversation, and it becomes very playful, right? So we do know that there's a threshold, that people are willing to accept the weird or the funky or the low quality. I mean, GIFs are super low quality historically. We largely serve videos at this point. We've turned everything to videos, but pixelation is like fundamental to the media itself, right? So like people's tolerances are pretty high. But yeah, to your point, I think once we get a little further along with the quality and the speed and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, we'll definitely be there.
And so let's jump for a sec, because you also do some really cool stuff when it comes to helping out other startups. I mean, you are like, I guess, the poster child for being able to just get your hands dirty in a startup, as we've heard over the last 40 minutes.
Yeah.
You took to it like a fish in water. And I would love to know, like, what are some things now that, because you're working with a venture capitalist or you're doing stuff, you're helping out, what is it? What's going on? Give me the story there. And then also just like, what have you been seeing and helping different startups with?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love the startup idea and the, just being involved, and I love helping people who have something kind of realize it. So I've done a lot of different, consulting on the side, fun projects. When you're starting something new and you've never done it before, it's very scary and challenging, right? And you're like leaping into the void, because there's just like, it's this thing like, who knows what's going to happen, and I got to do everything, right? So I've had people who've worked with me or worked under me, they go do stuff, and then I'll just kind of, help them along with their prototype, just like hey, let's walk through this product, right? Tell me what's going on. What are you thinking? Anything from that to like actual coding or running teams, like when you have a startup and you're, if you're not a technical founder or whatever, or even if you are a technical founder, running engineering teams is hard, right? Like, and so I've helped out other people like kind of prop up their teams and get that organized. And to me, it's all about alignment and respect, I would say. Like, like, again, I have this like communication literature background, so I can be pretty articulate, and like I can also have ideals, be kind of romantic about stuff, and I think you kind of need that to lead teams, because like, if you're just walking through a board and saying, okay, you do that, you do this, like that's demeaning. It's boring. Most engineers I know are really smart, creative people, so you kind of have to get them, kind of goes back to that cult thing, right? Like you say like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why it's important to the company. This is where you fit in. And this is why we're asking you to do this work, and then you trust them to go solve the problem, and you give engineers the space to solve it, and that gives them agency and autonomy, and then they'll do their best work usually, right? And then you kind of find that, it's like collaborating with musicians, right? Like you may have written a song, and you're like, here's the song, but I want you to kind of figure out this part, I haven't solved that, and you let them do it. And then they contributed back into it, right? So it's not just your song, it's like everybody's song. It's the same thing, I think, with product work. And I know that sounds fairly romantic, and some work is more interesting than other work, no doubt about it, And I personally tend to gear towards things that I find very interesting. I've done some like SaaS and kind of fintech consultations, and tend not to hang out there too long because I just get, that's not my jam. But but starting from scratch can be very helpful. And yeah, to the venture point, it's just a very different landscape than it was back in the day. I've been kind of following that and talking to people in the industry. And, when Giphy was raising and lots of people were raising, the App Store was there, but there was still this feeling like you can create something on the internet, and as long as there's demand, like, just let that thing go, right? And don't worry about revenue because, like, revenue is friction. Making people pay is friction. We're trying to see how big this thing can get. And that was kind of, investors would give money just based on growth. And I think that's not the same now, obviously, since maybe that kind of peaked in 2021. But, economics is like the Fed policy changing and everything, and a lot of these bubbles, crypto and metaverse, they've burst, and I think a lot of VCs are kind of, whoops, a lot of VCs, so there's been kind of a culling, I guess you could say. But, people care about revenue now, and they care about traction with users and numbers. And I think it's harder to have an idea or whatever. So it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's kind of interesting because as much as you can go out and build incredible things now that are much more difficult and much more have capabilities you could have never had in the past, it seems harder to get that VC backing, right? And then things aren't as greenfield either, right? Like, big tech owns a lot, and it's hard to, where you're Apple, you have the App Store, and you take a big cut, and they make the most money. Lots of companies started, but Apple made the most money from the App Store, right?
Yeah.
I feel like AI is kind of going that same way. Whereas someone like OpenAI, who I have tremendous respect for, but they're probably trying to follow that App Store model in a way where they're like, we're going to build all the capabilities you need, and then you're going to create apps or products on top of these capabilities, right? Which can be cool, and maybe you'll come up with stuff, but if you're an ML infrastructure company right now, then you're probably sweating, If you're an ML specific tool that does something, this is kind of a generalized tool, then you're probably sweating right now because big tech has so much money and resources and they can eat you alive if they choose. So, if to build right now, I think you got to be real specific about your user, and you probably got to be building on those edge cases a little bit, right? Where this isn't like Giphy survived because no big tech companies wanted to build a GIF search engine. It's not like we had some unique technology.
Magic sauce.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like, well, they already did it, right? And it's pretty good. So let's just incorporate it into this thing because we're not going to spin up a team to do that. Yeah, I think that's kind of, you have to look in those spots, right? Where what is big tech not going to be dealing with or not paying attention to? And then you can kind of build around that. And we'll see. I don't know if the idea of these billion-dollar companies everywhere is the same. You may have a lot of $100 million companies that are kind of built on top of these different infrastructures. So we'll see. It's just it's a different world, in my opinion. But it's at the same time, I build stuff on my own all the time because it's just how can you not be excited about this? And yeah, they may not be the biggest thing ever, but I don't know, you could probably do well and make some money and maybe get some other people to help you out and they make some money and then maybe do it again,
Uh-huh. Yeah, especially these days, being able to leverage what OpenAI has put out.
Exactly.
It's incredible. It is a little bit I know I shouldn't be using it because I'm just going to get myself a lock-in and I'm going to create a better ecosystem for them, but they make it so damn easy.
Yeah.
There's that paradox in a way. And then the other thing that you said is quite funny because I imagine back when Giphy was raising money, a seed round was probably $1 million maybe, or 500,000.
Yeah, totally.
Now these seed rounds for the AI companies are 18 million or 20 million.
Totally.
And you're oh, that's a seed round? That sounds more like A
totally.
or a B.
Yeah, I think counter to what I just said about venture, the AI stuff has been kind of insulated, and it's kind of that bastion of throw money at it, if you've got the right pedigree and the right background and you're going to go start, something that's a kind of a general, like an LLM company or a general tool company, then yeah, you probably got a lot of venture. But how long are those going to be here? Some of them might be here for a while that, some of them have got billions of dollars raised, but some of these other ones, I think they'll just have a hard time competing with the ones that are already light years ahead,
Yeah, it is fascinating to me too to see that there's all these different use cases. I am a big fan of following what happens in e-commerce, and e-commerce you used to be able to raise money for e-commerce, and now it's kind of do you really need to raise money for this? Is it better just to get debt? What's the reason? Is it going to be one of those 100 or 1,000x outcomes? I don't know. So it's hard. But Nick, man, I appreciate you coming on here. I've taken up a ton of your time, and this is super, super cool. For anybody that wants to reach out, we'll leave all your details in the description so they can hit you up on LinkedIn and I'm going to keep using GIFs. I'm just going to
Thank you.
plant my flag in the sand
Appreciate
right
it,
now,
Demetrius.
despite what my daughters tell me and my cousins that say I'm not cool anymore. I don't care.
Yeah.
I will take it. I really enjoy the way that GIFs make me smile when I see them. So
That's
I love
everything.
what y'all are doing. And thanks for coming on here.
My pleasure. Thanks, Demetrius. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all you do. Take care.
Hey, Laszlo here. If you're serious about MLOps, you hit subscribe right now.